tuche tempe tinle yarngoda belge drolor zambe zeparche pande lame shabla solwade Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munisha Sanekar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Om Guru Sumati Munisha Sanekar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munishas Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Pakyuke Kudan Dagi Lu Pakyuke Sundan Dagi Pakyuke Tukdan Dagi Tenyerme Chiktu Chingi Lu Makyuke Kudan Dagi Lu Makyuke Sundan Dagi Makyuke Tukdan Dagi Tenyerme Chiktu Chingilo Dagi Chitsun Lama Tuje Che Nyamda Dala Tuje Siksu Su Gebe Shesan Dala Tendo Su Uyon Sungi Nawa Tsedu Tseji Nyingne Solwa Debe Tse Dejen Korlo Visu Lekshune Yela Sambe Deden Malupa Gemel Hunge Drubra Chingelo Tsoni Sodan Dikten Shabe Tse Dinge Namken Yisu Lekshune Labchen Tsoni Yonsu Tsopat Cheranye Dun Chamra Chingelo Chanchu Parginin Tsen Tukun Tu Nyu Peme Siodru Lekshun Chanchu Drube Gegen Kunshishi Tungen Dela Drubra Chingelo Dagelo Na Chola Chokpat Chemin Samjurng Emba Shiwa Dan Chedan Tumbe Deden Malupa Bemel Hunge Drubra Chingel Dorna Tingne Tsera Tamche Dan Techi Pardu Negav Tamche Tu Rese Kyamne Lama Kelem Tukje Chinge Dala Sikso So Gongyab Drewe Nyamda Dachala Chitsun Lame Tuje Rabgong Kudan Sungi Nawa Drame Tu Nyamsunyong Kesan Toprasho Kewa Kundu Yanda Lama Rame Cheki Pela Longche Chin Sadan Lamgi Yunden Rabzone Dorje Change Kopa Nyur Tobasho Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Svoha Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Svoha Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Svoha Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Chanchu Pardo Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Chanchu Pardo Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye chodan soge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapso chi dage chinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchira sange druparasho.
In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge in enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Namo yal haye ke dan ludan ne jin ke rudan mi ke nam dan ro kun ke tanam chi sampa tham che ke tu da ge che ten. Buongiorno.
Good morning.
Vorrei cominciare oggi.
I'd like to start today with an image. Let's imagine the sea.
Possiamo immaginare di essere al mare.
We can imagine that we're there and we're going from one point to the next, and we observe the sea and we see that there are waves and currents.
Non sempre il mare è facile.
The sea's not always easy. There are moments in which currents take us where we want to go, and other days it takes us where we don't want to go. And then other days in which there are no currents and we remain still. It's very tiring to be drawn out by the current in the direction opposite to where we want to go. What happens is that if we observe the sea and the various situations and currents, why is it like that? Actually, the truth is that there's not one answer, but there's an interaction between the various parts. I'm not the best person to explain this, but I can imagine. There are conditions, atmospheric conditions, the sun. There are thousands and thousands of interacting factors, and each factor does its little bit to create the currents as they manifest. A few months ago, I tried a few months ago to study meteorology. Let me see if I can understand something. And there was something very interesting. The tendency of the planet, atmospherically, is to be balanced and put the same temperature everywhere. Actually, that's a prevalent principle in nature, to balance everything. But what happens is that the energy, that there's a part of the earth that takes the sun, the other not. The terrain is different in different parts of the world. And this creates this movement. But the tendency would be to have the same temperature everywhere. There are an infinite number of factors which bring the various movements. If I'm in a little boat and I'm in the middle of the sea, and at a certain moment I see there's a very strong current and huge waves and a storm, I can't blame the sea, can I? But that's what we do. Very often, when we find ourselves in the situation of the storm or huge currents,
dove va lui dirà che bella questa corrente, no?
But and we see these currents are going towards us in the opposite direction where we want to go.
Mentre scendevo,
While I was coming down to the temple,
vedo molto spesso, ci ha chiesto come stai?
there's a person I see very often. He said, "How are you?" And I said, "I'm fine."
Affrontare e creare equilibrio fra, mi ha detto,
I'm trying, and he said, "I'm trying to create.
cercando di affrontare gli esseri umani,
I'm trying to find a better way to interact with human beings. I find a balance with my emotions."
mi è venuto in mente, gli ho detto,
And it came to mind that,
sai quando è che non dovrai più farlo? Il giorno che saranno tutti morti.
you know, the day in which I won't have to do that, the day in which everybody dies,
L'azione di uno, la volontà
the day in which I don't have to deal with my emotions and those of others, it means that everybody's dead. That's the only way it can happen.
di dire quando è che il mare che diventa tutto sempre uguale il tempo.
When is it that the sea will be have exactly the same situation, state, temperature, etc., but never, because as long as there's movement and change,
Questa tendenza di guardare la vita intorno
we tend to look at the life and the world that surrounds us.
di una visione più ampia del pianeta,
I'm not even talking about on a larger scale looking at the planet, but I'm talking about our own personal reality. We look around and we say, hey, this shouldn't be like this.
non lo so, ognuno di noi che è qua
Everybody who's here,
potrebbe fare una piccola lista.
everybody here, I believe, can make their own little list of things that they would like to be otherwise.
Secondo noi dovrebbero essere diverse. E non parlo
And I'm not talking at macro level, I'm talking about micro level.
se qualcuno che
If there's somebody who,
vicino a voi nella vostra vita che secondo
somebody near to you,
un comportamento diverso sarebbe meglio.
is it somebody who is near you, who's in, and if their behavior were different, would it be better? Yeah.
Materiale che
If
secondo voi se fosse diverso sarebbe meglio.
is there a material situation that if it were different, it would be better?
Ad allargare il cerchio più aumenta
So the more we increase our circle,
che secondo noi sarebbe.
the more things that we'd like to see different.
Adesso riprendiamo questo e lo rimettiamo sulla metafora di prima.
Okay, let's take this and put it on the metaphor that we had before. I'm in the middle of the sea, and there are very strong bad currents.
Che secondo me non dovrebbe andare, eccetera, eccetera.
There's-
Cosa posso fare?
what can I do?
Uno, posso stare lì a lamentarmi
You can start complaining.
che questo non va bene,
This is no good. It shouldn't be like this.
è colpa mia se
It's not my fault
andare,
if I can't go where I want to.
di là, questo e quell'altro.
This, that, and the other.
Stare lì a vittimizzarmi,
We can victimize ourselves
che il vento
and wait that the wind is right and
è quello che voglio io.
and also the currents. And by right, I mean that which I want.
Qua finalmente le cose sono nel...
And then I might say, oh, finally, things are right, i.e., as I want them to be.
Un'altra alternativa invece
Another alternative is
è quella di vedere, ok,
to say, okay,
in questa direzione,
the direction's going this
cosa posso fare io?
direction. What can I do
Modo di veleggiare, di navigare,
in my way of sailing on the sea?
io utilizzando la realtà in cui mi trovo.
I'll go using the reality in which I find myself
Perché se
rather than opposing it.
c'è poco vento,
If there's
se io devo veleggiare e non c'è vento, devo sapere
if there's
cosa
very
in quel momento
if there's very little wind and I'm sailing the sea, I know how to
fare le cose che devo fare, visto che
I need to know how to deal with that moment. I can do other things on the boat.
tanto vento e devo andare veloce, non è il momento per andare
When there's a lot of wind and
a fare le cose.
when I need to go quickly and because there's a lot of wind, I haven't got time to fix things on the boat.
E una delle chiavi per me più importanti
And one of the most important keys,
per controllo delle correnti, dei venti, eccetera,
it's not to have control of currents and winds because nobody has it, but to be a good navigator.
saper navigare bene.
Uh,
E saper navigare bene nel
Which means also in life, to know how to navigate life.
controllo delle situazioni nelle quali noi viviamo. Il nostro livello di controllo è molto limitato
The level of control that we have in the situations where we find ourselves is minimal.
dei nostri pensieri fino a un certo punto,
Okay, we kind of have a sort of control
delle nostre azioni, delle nostre...
of our thoughts, our actions, choices.
Io non ho
But I have no control on what the other person is going to do. That's up to the choices of the other person. What happens around me, starting from people who are very, very close to me, I have no control. But if I start projecting that in order for me to be well, the world around me has to correspond to what I believe is right, I'm kind of, I can't win. We have this kind of absurd expectation that the wind and the currents be as we want them to use the same analogy, and it's not going to happen. Therefore, in my way of seeing things, according to me, and according to Buddhism, the key instrument in life is navigation. They're really lessons on navigation of life. I can share my knowledge with you, but it's actually you that has to navigate. Therefore, the first important step, even if it's kind of difficult, quite difficult, even after many years we may not succeed in taking it, is to understand that it's a kind of con. It's a con to believe that we can control the world around us. We can't. But in the same way, we're not the result of the external world. We interact. When we feel well, there's a moment of joy, but we feel good. What do we say? Do we say, I feel good? Or we start saying, hey, how come I feel good? Do we have somebody to accuse so to say, for feeling good? Sure, I feel good because this, that, and that happened. We connect ourselves with something external. When I don't feel good, do we can say to ourselves, I don't feel good, or do we look for the culprit? We look for it. And the strange thing is, and when we find somebody to blame, and then we relax ourselves when we find somebody that we can blame something for, and then we've sort of relaxed. Does that happen to you? Okay, I don't feel good, it's because of that person or that thing. First of all, what happens is that I'm going to go around in a different direction now. This is an example that I've always liked. In Nagarjuna, the teachings of Nagarjuna, in his text, he says, he explains how everything's in mutual dependence, and he was talking about runners. Let's say a runner. What does a runner do? In order to be a runner, he has to run, simply. He doesn't have to have an exam, and he doesn't have to enroll in the professional association of runners. No, he simply has to run. No, you don't have to do any of that. He's a runner. The act of running, can exist without the runner. Is it possible to have running without the person who runs? Can there be a runner without the action of running? Is it possible? Is it possible that there be a runner independently of the act of running? Where? How can I have somebody who runs without the action? Is there a runner here in this temple now? No, because nobody's running. In fact, if somebody starts running around the temple, in that case, there would be the action of running. If I say the runner has to run, there's a kind of consistency. A runner doesn't exist until he starts running. The act of running doesn't exist until somebody starts running. Another example, cause and effect, cause and result. The cause, a cause exists without there being a result. A result doesn't exist without there being a cause. The runner and running. The cause and the result, we can go on infinitely. They're mutually interdependent. One doesn't exist without the other. So they're the same thing? No. But one doesn't exist without the other. Let's have an example. Can you see me? I can see you. You can see me. Let's imagine you ask a person next door, can you see Lama? And they'd say yes. But if we think, if we adapted the question, if we were to say, do you see the Lama that I see? Without philosophizing, what would you say? Theoretically, without philosophizing? Sure, of course I can see him. There's just one. Sure, I can see him. But if we were to philosophize, what happens when we see something? See, touch, etc. In this, there's some light which touches me, and it's reflected, and it goes towards your eyes with a certain frequency, etc. And therefore, there are shapes and forms, and these arrive. Now I'm looking at the telecamera, and it arrives to all your eyes. This image that arrives to your eyes, and your brain says, what is this? There's our sensor, the eyes, which receives these signals, and they send it to your brain. And then from this, there is a kind of internal, where we have a kind of internal data bank of everything that's happened to us. And then we say to ourselves, what is this? And we attribute a meaning to that. This is Lama, the Lama, Lama Michel, etc. Everybody attributes their own meaning. I cannot absolutely see any of you without the value that I personally attribute to each one. Depends on my eyesight, and then the value that I attribute to that. So what everybody sees, it's not the same. I don't know if that's clear. Therefore, what happens is that if we ask the person next door, do you see the Lama that I see? The correct answer is no, because I'm not you. And if we were to describe in minimal detail what we see, they'd be similar but different. And in some cases, very different. For example, it's happened to me that people have described situations where I've been, and I can't recognize that situation because they perceived it differently. So we perceive the external world through ourselves. What I see, if I like it or not, it's just it's very personal. I don't know if that's clear. We we can't see anything independently from ourselves. It depends on our childhood, experiences that we've lived through, our culture, or the whole baggage that we have. We live the present through that. But if I were to ask myself, if I say, do you exist? Well, sure, you'd say sure. Okay, let's something simpler. The sound exists. But what happens is that the sound I hear, it doesn't exist independently from myself. My mind, which perceives the sound, which I hear, it doesn't exist independently from my mind, which perceives it. But the key is that even my mind that perceives the sound doesn't exist independently from the sound. They're mutually dependent. The runner and running. Observer and object of perception. One doesn't exist without the other. Because if we were to see, if we look at the world that surrounds us, are we influenced it by or not? Let's say we're at home with somebody. Their emotional state affects us or not? Certainly. If it's cold, if it's warm, everything that happens around us, an infinite amount of number of things. Our physical state influences the environment in which we're in, the people that surround us. Reality does exist, but all this reality around it doesn't exist for us independently from ourselves. And we see it with so many filters, personal filters. In other words, our internal reality does not exist independently from external reality and vice versa. What comes first, the egg or the chicken? It doesn't matter. The fact is you can't see what comes first is because one can't exist without the other. The question I make, without wanting to philosophize too much, is principally, what can I do? What can I do to navigate this life? Because what we want at the end of the day is just to be well and avoid suffering. The absurd thing is, we see things as inevitable, wars, etc. The most absurd thing for me is that these things, these wars happen at the end of the day. It's because everybody wants to be happy. That's the crazy thing. For example, in a family, and there's a big argument between everybody. I think everybody's had this experience. Both people or all people involved, they all want to be happy or not. Why do people argue? Because we have different visions on how to achieve the same result. The way of thinking is different, but the end result, desired result, is the same. But obviously, my happiness comes above yours. It's more important than yours. And that's the way we live. And as long as I want the same thing as you, and we're going the same direction, everything's good. But when what I want contradicts what you want, then we have trouble. But what prevails? Obviously, what I want. But this is a big con at the end of the day. We're deceiving ourselves. The fact to live well, to live better, we don't have to tweak the external world and change the conditions in which we live. I mean, I haven't met people who've managed to do this. I've met people who are very, very rich, fantastic families, good health, etc., etc. But they're still there with all the usual conflicts. But what is possible is to see how I interact with external realities, because my external reality doesn't exist independently from my internal reality, and vice versa. But where can I work? What can I do in this situation? I can only work on my internal reality. So when I start tweaking my internal filters, everything changes. My reality changes. And here we can make a huge change. Because it's true that we're influenced by external world, the situations, but the way in which I relate to those situations can change enormously my experience. If I wake up one day, let's say we're angry, sad, there's something that's not right. We don't feel good. We live the situations, we experience situations in a very bad way. But other days we wake up in a really good mood. Oh, life is great. Who cares if there's this problem? Doesn't matter. We have a different way of confronting situations. The first important thing is we've got to stop victimizing ourselves. Don't remain in that situation. Why continue to wait until things go in as I say they do, or people behave in the way that I think they should. So the way I think, the way I behave can affect this. So we shouldn't wait for external situations and people to be in a way that I believe they should be, because it's never going to happen. I don't know if that's clear. So what do we do? There's so many things we can do. When we get this clarity about our internal reality being very important, so there are certain factors, internal factors, the stronger they are, the better I am, I feel, and vice versa, the worse they are. For example, if I create fear, dissatisfaction, obsession with a self-gratification, arrogance, the worse we are. The more we develop those, the worse we are. And we can just see how the body behaves. When we feel anger, how does the body react? Badly. A person who's constantly angry, that they don't feel good. Once, somebody went to Lama Michel Rinpoche and said, Rinpoche, sai, you know, every time I get angry, I have a terrible headache. And Lama Michel said, so this headache is your best teacher. It's telling you exactly what you shouldn't do. It's showing that your behavior is not healthy, it's not good for you. And even when we receive such a clear message, we do a crazy thing of continuing to react in that way, even when we have clear signals that's not good for us. Sure, I know that anger's not good for you, but did you see what happened? I don't care what happened, in the sense that it doesn't justify an action which hurts me and doesn't resolve the situation. Okay, maybe I could accept it if it harmed me but resolved the situation, but I don't think that happens. But anger, jealousy, envy, rancor, dissatisfaction, unlimited attachment, unlimited desires, this thing of always wanting more and more and more. It's not good for me or the world. when we give priority to the internal path and to adopt that which is good for us and abandon that which is bad for us, that's the spiritual path. It doesn't have to be religious. You can follow Buddhism, Christianity, or have no religion. But when you enter a spiritual path, when you develop that which brings you less suffering and more happiness, love, compassion, stability, etc., harmony, things which are good for us. So the more I have, the better I am. There's not a limit. No, it's not like if you love, it's not that you reach a certain amount of love that you give or receive or satisfaction that it's no good beyond a certain point. The more you have, the better it is. The more they are, the better I am. Therefore, to give priority to develop our internal characteristics which are good for us and the others and the interaction we have with us, and wanting to diminish the behaviors, attitudes, we can call them many different ways, that harm us, and also the interaction with others. And we want to diminish those, and we have this importance. That means we've embarked on the spiritual path. And honestly, for me, spirituality is not an optional. It's not something, well, yeah, maybe. It's a necessity that we have. That if we take advantage of certain things, that's a different thing. Eating well. Is it a necessity or is it a kind of an optional? Eating healthfully for me is a necessity. But so many people don't do that. Taking care of our emotions, habits, attitudes is a necessity. What does it mean taking care of these things? First of all, to give a direction, to become our own boss of ourselves, and not to live our emotions, behavior, actions towards the world as if we were a mere result of the world that surrounds us. Because at the end of the day, well, who does it depend on if I get angry or not? If I love or don't love? If I'm grateful or not? Really? It depends on us. But how often does it happen that we're aware of this? Not very often. Usually what happens is that when we don't feel well, we blame a person or a situation. We need to reverse this. There's an important attitude, which is to review what we want what we really want. We wake up in the morning. We go to work. We have to take care of the family. Husband, wife, various problems throughout the day. And then we start taking lots of tablets to deal with all this. So because there's always things to resolve, and many people rely on medication. But at the same time, each of these experiences, every person we meet, each day at work, situations, every time I talk to a member of my family, any situation, it reinforces one habit or another. So we need to shape ourselves, model ourselves. When at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of a certain period, it's not only what happened, what I did, sorry, there's rather, it's more about how I reacted to those situations. Let's say the week goes there's a whole week where I have great financial results. That's great. But could it be at the price of tensions in the home? Or did we betray our personal principles, or did it create a great deal of stress for me and others? What is our priority? What I do, what I obtain, when I earn, when I receive, things that I manage to get, or who I am? What am I becoming? Because we have work, and oh, I earn so much, and I get stressed. I can have loads of money, but I can be stressed, ill. And what do I do with all this money when I'm depressed? I go to so many doctors. I get the same cures. And I don't mean to criticize the process of work, but just rather to review together what our priorities are. Very often, really, our priority is not to earn a lot of money, to do grandiose things, a huge career, whatever. Very often, at the end of the day, is to just bring life, to live life. Yeah, so life goes on. We have taken decisions. With awareness or not. As long as I've got this job, I'll go on with the same job. And we have an enormous amount of things that have to do with our comfortable existence. You know, we try to avoid things that we like and attract to things we like very often. And that's our priority very often, just life going on. But in the middle of all this, there's us. Our habits. Emotions. Health. So the question I ask myself is it's not what am I doing, how much I earn, but rather, am I becoming a healthier person? How am I healthy in the sense physically, mentally? What am I becoming? How am I changing? Am I better? Do I feel better or worse? At the end of the day, what counts is what counts more are our internal filters rather than those external factors. Another thing. For example, if you have an object that's imbalanced, let's say we have environment and the other side, the body, and then there's a fulcrum in the middle, which is... So for example, if the environment is not right, we lose balance, and also for our health. But when the mind is unhealthy, even if our mind is not healthy, even if the environment and our health is balanced, the fulcrum kind of falls. But if I acquire the flexibility to confront these situations, I can keep my balance. There are situations that I may live. And the reverse is true. If my mind is bad and I have very healthy situation around me, and it's a kind of paradise. With an unhealthy mind, I can be in hell. So we can be in hell even if we find ourselves in paradise. The question is how much? The question is how much effort do we dedicate in terms of time, etc., to the health of our mind, which is the most important resource that we have. As the body, it has the same characteristics as the body, is getting used to certain things. The more I react in a certain way, the more reinforced it becomes. The more I'm angry, the angrier I will be. The more grateful I am, the more grateful I will be in the future. Nothing arises independently. It becomes from habit. So in front of each situation, we should say, how should I react? In what direction do I want to go in? Therefore, the first question is, in spiritual path, do I want to live in a perfect world, or do I want a healthy way to confront the world? The difficulty is that the answer can't be given only conceptually. It has to come from deep down, honest, but honest with ourselves. Because certain times I'm a Buddhist and I have all these concepts full of Buddhist concepts, and I respond on the basis of those concepts. But what happens internally, really, in everyday life? Where am I directing myself? What am I trying to create a perfect external world, reality, or to establish something that enables me to deal with what happens externally in a healthy way? When we give priority and we answer sincerely to ourselves that the important thing is how I react to the world, how I interact. Sometimes people make the mistake of seeing the Buddhist attitude as being very passive, like accepting everything. No, it's not passive. There's a situation. How can I confront it? And I'll do it. But I have to act. It's not like I just say, oh, it doesn't matter, I'll just switch off. No, that's not the way. There is a correlation, but at the same time, I can't just tweak external reality and expect to be well internally, automatically. When we manage to make this step, this naturally brings us to a fundamental point. What is it that is good for me, and what is it that harms me? That's the basic question. And when I recognize harmful behavior of mine, I need to abandon them. I need determination to not nourish them anymore. But is it easy or difficult to do? It reminds me, once I was going I was listening to an explanation of the Bodhisattva Charitaravada, and they were talking about patience. Very beautiful chapter. And he was going through all the reasons why anger is not good for you. And if you read it correctly, you get to the conclusion, hey, I'm not doing this before, you're not going to get angry. We were reading it. And at a certain point, Somebody goes,
Non era neanche una domanda, era più che altro una
and wasn't a question he asked,
un po' arrabbiato.
but angrily.
Scusi Lama,
Somebody asked Lama, sorry, Lama,
io sento queste cose da 30 anni.
I hear this thing. I've been listening to this for 30 years. I understand. I understand anger's not good.
La rabbia viene.
But when anger comes, it comes.
Va di stare a dire il perché di qua non funziona.
Just countering it with argumentation just doesn't work.
Ed è vero,
And it's true.
capire non funziona.
Understanding does not work.
Se noi pensiamo che
If we
perché
think-
abbiamo capito che arrabbiarsi fa male, riusciremo a non arrabbiarsi.
If you think just by understanding that getting angry is harmful, that we stop getting angry, that's just not true. We have to work on it.
Prendere
We need to
conoscenza per
take that knowledge to give us a direction.
non importa ciò che accada, non è una ragione.
And we have to say, so, hey, whatever happens, I'm not going to get angry.
E adesso cosa faccio?
But now what am I going to do?
Due cose.
Two things.
Io devo
I must
diminuire la forza di quell'abitudine
diminish the force of that habit and to create a new habit.
Facciamo un esempio molto
Here's, here's an important but very simple example. We have an addiction, let's say to sugar,
dipendenza all'uso
the use of,
cellulari e così via.
the use of cellular phone.
Riconosco che quella cosa mi fa male.
I recognize it's bad for me. I've listened. I know that it's bad for you. And now what do?
Devo
I must
diminuire quell'abitudine,
diminish that
dare quella cosa
that habit,
e devo cercare di fare qualcosa che vada nella direzione opposta.
and I need to do something that goes in the opposite direction. An antidote, let's say.
Di prendere il cellulare in mano e non ho nessuna ragione particolare.
Let's say I've got this instinct to grab the phone for no particular reason. I know it's good for me. I know it's not good for me. I take 3 deep breaths and I leave it there and I take a book.
Però quando parliamo per esempio della rabbia,
But when we talk about anger,
di qualunque cosa sia,
or whatever it is,
è più facile da
it's easier. I take anger because it's easy to understand.
capire di nutrire quell'abitudine.
We just need to stop feeding that habit and then to counter it with a new habit. How can I stop feeding that habit?
Cosa consapevolezza?
With
Riconosco l'abitudine
awareness.
quando viene, vedo la
To recognize it when it arises.
cominciare prima di tutto a vedere.
So first thing is to see it.
Non ho consapevolezza,
Because if,
posso ridirezionare.
because without awareness you can't give it another direction.
I primi passi molto importanti è
Most important steps is to be aware of ourselves.
quali sono le nostre abitudini che ci fanno bene,
What's the habits which are good for us, those which are bad for us, and to have awareness internally and of the way we react mentally and physically towards things.
la cosa difficile della
The difficult thing about dependence,
consapevolezza, non riusciamo a cambiare quella cosa lì.
once we have a good awareness of this bad habit,
Mi dice, guarda Lama, è meglio quando non sapevo.
yeah, it's like somebody came to me and said, you know, I was better off when I didn't know about my habits. Before, I got angry and I thought I was right.
Contento,
Yeah, I was actually even nearly happy, you know, hey, I was right. Now I get angry.
rimango male con me stesso che mi sono arrabbiato.
And I feel really guilty with myself that I got angry.
Mi arrabbio con me perché mi sono arrabbiato.
And then I get angry with myself because I got angry.
Più con l'altro perché mi ha fatto arrabbiare.
In this situation, I get even more angry with the other person.
Vedo quella roba lì e non
And
riesco a fermarla.
with the other person, I can see it, but I can't stop it.
La beatitudine dell'ignoranza.
So, sometimes it's a blessing to be ignorant, he said.
Quando arriviamo a quel punto lì,
When we get to,
stiamo facendo bene.
it's actually a good sign when we get to that point,
Quando arriviamo al punto che noi vediamo,
when we see the habit,
non riusciamo a
but we aren't able
stiamo facendo
to stop it, means we've made the first step.
fare il secondo.
But of course, now we have to take the second step.
È un po' come per dire,
It's like saying,
sto correndo verso il precipizio.
I'm running towards a precipice.
Era meglio quando correvo verso il precipizio, non lo sapevo. Adesso io lo so.
Was it better when I didn't know I was running towards a precipice? I don't know.
Possibilità di fermarmi o cambiare direzione.
Let's see if it's possible to change direction, to stop. That's the point.
Perciò Prima consapevolezza.
First awareness. And the second step is recognize what's arising in me. I don't block it. So the first thing we tend to do when we have awareness is to block something. No. When we have a very strong habit, it's even stronger than. So it's much stronger than understanding. But the second step is to feel it, and we decide not to follow it. We feel it arising, this anger. I can see it. I take it. I embrace it. And I try not to react to it. I take a decision. I decide not to take a decision based on anger, on confronting that. And then the second level, I'm no longer influenced by the anger, not only physically, but also mentally. And I wait for it to pass. And the good news is that in the same way that anger appears, it can also disappear. But I have seen people being angry for 3 or 4 days. But usually it's a couple of hours. So I've seen people who've managed to go to bed angry, live 3 or 4 days really angry, and they manage to maintain that. But usually it doesn't last so long. Therefore, first thing is awareness. Second thing is second level. Don't block it, don't follow it. The third level, don't follow physically and verbally or mentally. So the second part. I stop. I don't react on the basis of that. So that includes messages because you say, okay, I'm going to improve my speech. I'm just going to write messages. No, it doesn't work. I'm sorry. Speech means communicating. Second thing. So the other thing is not to write, not to speak, or to do anything under the influence with anger. And the second step is it's also to avoid, the next step is to avoid the internal dialogue. Yeah, sure, I got angry, but did you see what he did to me? Every time the habit of anger arises and we have to react with speech, our body or mind, make sure we so the more we repeat it, the worse it becomes. When it comes, this attitude, and we manage not to follow it, it passes and it becomes weaker. First level, awareness. Second, don't block it and don't follow it with body, speech, or mind. And the third level is to give continuity to the second point. The tendency is normally, because I kind of control myself, I steel myself, and then we go boom, we lose control. It reminds me once, I woke up one morning and I did something I was very proud of. I managed to do what I wanted to do, and I was really pleased with myself. And I went to have breakfast. Actually, it was in a period where I never had breakfast. And I was dying to tell people what I'd managed to do. It was for my ego. Look what I've done. When I'm there, I become aware of what I'm doing. It was absolutely unnecessary to tell people. It was just a way of feeding my pride. So I managed not to do it. Change subject. I start saying something, I'm so tempted, but I change subject. But at a certain point, I managed to avoid saying, I fight it, and at a certain point, it just comes out, and then, of course, you have to do it well. You have to start. And that means we have to do, we should manage to do the second level, which means that we don't follow it until it passes. And remind ourselves, it's impermanent. It goes. I feel emotion. And one of the things that helps us a lot is to remind ourselves that that emotion, it's not something that's happening. It's a memory. It's a memory of an emotion. It doesn't mean to say that we have to, it's a habit based on the memory of emotions. But what I can feel, yes, it's real, but it's more a habit. And I don't need to react on the basis of this. It's an act of love towards ourselves. It's not a sacrifice. We're being kinder to ourselves. Look, I don't say, look how horrible I've been. No. It's an act of affection towards ourselves. Okay, we say that anger is there. It's making me see something. Conflicts to resolve. Internal wounds. And I embrace all this. Okay, I listen to you and I don't have to react now. When I manage to do this well, it just passes. At that point, and then I have to enter the first is awareness, second is not to follow or block, and the third one is to give continuity to the second point, and not to nourish that attitude. When I've managed to block and not react, I recognize everything. I've managed to block it, not follow it, and then I manage to react to you in an opposite way. For example, not with anger, but with patience, with consideration, with love. Oh, do I have to? Okay. Do I have to be loving to you when I want to kill you? When the internal sentiment, I want to kill you? No, you fight that. But that's the third steps. Okay, we react not to kind of make up for what I've done before, but I have to nourish an opposite way of being. Because the more I respect you and attitude and more harmony with you, the less I'll have a conflictual relationship with the other. Therefore, we must stop and diminish the force of harmful habits and increase the opposite ones that are good for us. You might say, well, yeah, this is a full-time job. Certainly, it certainly is. And here we have a problem. We don't have the choice to nourish or not nourish habits. There's no standing still. We don't have the choice to transform or not, to train ourselves or not. Every moment of life in which we are training ourselves in one thing or another. We're getting used to something. We're transforming ourselves. Because when we're at home, we have our habits. Some are good, some are bad. And if I continue to act in the same way, I'm nourishing, I'm feeding these habits. The first level of the path, the spiritual path, is to love ourselves. And to love ourselves, we should have clarity about where we want to go. And to put energy into what's good for us and abandon that which is bad for us. And that's already a lot to do. One of the things that helps so much is what's called morality. In Mahayana Buddhism, so the teachings of Buddha have been were divided into three, but they're all the same. But the methods are different. The first one is commonly called the Hinayana, the small vehicle, which means taking care of ourselves, which is very important. And then successively, and which you can't get to without the first, is the Mahayana tradition, the big vehicle. I make a commitment to work on myself, not sort of only for my benefit, but also for everybody. So there's a process of altruism. So everything is geared towards working on ourselves to help other people. In the Vajrayana tradition, the vehicle, it's the vehicle of non-duality, or the diamond way, to use body and mind and environment to be able to go on this path more quickly, to accomplish it more quickly. So Vajrayana is part of Mahayana. So if you were to ask, if you ask yourself, what are the most important things about following the path of Buddhism? One is to cultivate compassion and love towards ourselves and others. And then to develop our generosity, morality, generosity, concentration, and wisdom. And we work on our 6 perfections in order to accomplish this. And the second one, after generosity, is morality. What does that mean? Without getting into the etymology of the word, in the context of Sultrim, in Tibetan Buddhism called Sultrim, Samsung, the Japanese mark, Samsung, so it's easy to remember. Actually, Samsung would actually work. Sem vuol dire mind. Sung vuol dire means protection of the mind. Sam is mind, Sung is protection. So we can also use the Japanese trademark to remind ourselves. For example, Canon, the cameras, actually comes from Kuan Yin. It's the version of Tara Avalokiteshvara. Anyway, never mind, I'm going down a rabbit hole. I don't know where Samsung comes from. Anyway, Samsung reminds us Samsung in Tibetan. Mind protection. Morality means the protection of our mind. Let's have an example. Okay, sugar is not good for me. I know it's not good for me. But do I get the urge sometimes? So I need to protect myself from my own weakness. I make a commitment to not eat sugar. I take a vow. Make a commitment. So the commitment I make is to protect myself from my own weaknesses. So if I could just say, hey, I'm not going to eat sugar anymore, and that would work, fine. But that usually doesn't work. The commitments are, in a way, it's like the stripes on the road with so many curves. It happened to me once, and I was a very tiny, windy road in the middle of the night with lots of fog, and there were no lines on the road, so that was really difficult. I was coming back from Bologna once. There was so much fog, and I could find, and this was another occasion, I did see the white stripes that defined the road, and that gave me a really good sense of security. But when we have a lot of sun, we can see the road very clearly. The stripes are there to keep us on the road when there's a lot of darkness. When we're in a moment of happiness and harmony, we don't really need these lines, because in that moment we're on a good road. We know what's good for us. The stripes or the demarcations, we need them when we need them. So when we have internal storms, that's morality. So I take a commitment with myself where I have guidelines, what I must develop and what I must abandon. When I have difficult moments, when, let's say, my strong habits come out, I have a kind of reference to base my behavior on. That's my morality. Not to lie. It's the commitment not to lie is important when I have the urge to lie. So the commitment not to eat sugar is important, is there when we have the urge to eat sugar. So it's this thing, morality, protection of the mind, isn't it? Commitment we make with ourselves to direct our behavior, both physically, mentally, and verbally. And how we manage to do this depends on the respect that we give to our own word. And that's one of the big problems of today, in today's society, is that our word counts less and less. We say, oh yeah, I give my word, I commit to this, and after I say, oh wow, I've changed my mind. So for example, if I were to make a commitment to jump 3 times every time I wake up, okay, it's not important really if I jump up and down 3 times when I get out of bed. What is important, that I've broken my word. And that influences our self-esteem. So if you take a commitment, make a commitment, you respect it. The more you respect them, your commitments, our self-esteem increases, and belief in our capacity to do things. The more I can choose a direction and follow it, so one of the things to cultivate and to nourish is our ability to keep our commitments. So therefore we should keep just a few commitments, but make sure that we keep them. Because even if traditionally so there is this tradition when Buddhism arrived in Tibet at a certain point, there were monastic vows, for example. There were 2 vows. There was one, there was a tradition that you would take vows for a limited period, 3 or 6 months or a year, and which you could break, and after the in Thailand, you can take the vows for a limited period. But the king of Tibet said, no, here we need stronger vows because Tibetans are wild. We need more severe vows, otherwise nothing. Let's say in Brazil. For example, it could be another example would be, hey, in Brazil we might say, I'll make these commitments until Carnival, and then I'd break them because there's a lot more fun to have. But the context in which we are, I believe, means if we have a vow for an unlimited period, increasingly we experience that there's some kind of burden. So I think it's better not to make a commitment for an indefinite period. So if you take a vow for a limited period, it's much easier because you can see the end. I don't know why, but I ended up in Bombay in a place. In Bombay, and I found this place where Reiki was established in India. And there were phrases written on the wall, and one of them was, one of the commitments started with, just for today. Just for today, for example, I won't, you could say, I won't eat sugar. So we're really kind of conning ourselves if we take a commitment, an open-ended commitment. It's not going to work. And we shouldn't make commitments to things that we know we can't keep. So, for example, if we take the commitment want to take the commitment for 100, doing 100, let's make it 50. Let's err on the side of ease. And then we can add a further 50, but let's be realistic about our ability. So we can make a commitment for a month, a year. We can always renew it. So, for example, in the community Damahu, which is near here and Turin, near Turin, I went to visit them. They have a different kind of family setup than we're used to. So, for example, the marriage vows that they have in this community are for a limited period. And the maximum that their marriage vows can last is for a year. After a year, they can choose to renew these vows or not. But every time they renew the vows, there's a path that they have to embark on in terms of self-development, to develop gratitude, etc. Then after 5 years, they can renew this commitment for 2 years. And the most interesting things, and the interesting thing is that the couples actually stay together much more. The success rate in marriages is much better than outside. People stay together longer. If I make a commitment, if I make an open-ended commitment, there's a kind of heaviness. But if I think, oh God, I've only got a month to go, I managed to do it. And we can get distracted with an open-ended commitment. We get distracted from what the true aim is. So, actually, the truth is, if we don't make commitments with ourselves, things just stay on a conceptual level. That would be great if I didn't use the cell phone so much and read a few books or something, but it kind of remains there.
Non devo fare, però lo faccio, ho un senso di colpa.
Often we say, I shouldn't do something. So sometimes we have this weird mechanism where we know we shouldn't do something, we do it, we feel guilty, and then we feel that with our sense of guilt, we've kind of paid for the fact that we've done this thing that is not good for us. But seriously speaking, I invite ourselves, I include myself, to look with attention. Let's write it down. What are the things that depend on me, that I do, that are not good for me? I mean physical behavior. Take the cell phone, sleep late or whatever, way of eating, physical behavior, verbal behavior, the way I speak, and mental behavior. Before we can direct the mind, we must be able to direct the body and our speech. When we manage to do this, we are automatically directing the mind because we think through words. And one of the keys and one of the commitments is to look at the way we speak. And I did this personally by eliminating certain words. For example, when I read the book by Orwell in 1984, which was really important for me, I read it during the exam period. I started reading it during the exam period in the monastery, but I just couldn't stop reading it, even though I had a lot to study. I kind of devoured it. And one of the things that hit me was the language that was used in this book. The New Speak, they call it. And it had a characteristic. So one of the things was that every year words were eliminated in this New Speak to take away concepts. Because if I want to control the way in which you think, and I have to control the way you speak, so certain words were eliminated in a way that would eliminate the concepts. I thought this was interesting. I could use this to my benefit. What are the concepts that are bad for me that are expressed through words? Because the main interlocutor that we have is with ourselves. We dialogue with ourselves. We speak to ourselves more than anyone else. So a few that we can get rid of. So if you think this is interesting, a good, try and do it for a week. Start for a week. A month is a bit too much to start off with. For a week, try not saying if. Prohibited. If I had done this, if I do this, if you were like this. So no if. So that's quite interesting because then you exclude the possibility of the mind to think about certain things. Because after if, anything can come after. And actually we eliminate a lot of the very tiring, exhausting internal dialogue that we have with ourselves. So one of the biggest problems we have is chronic stress. So this is caused by we find ourselves in front of what we consider to be a threat. We either want to escape or we confront it, this perceived threat. But the big con is And the big problem is that we act in the same way with the same, we react in the same way, be it a physical or mental threat. And we have the same level of stress. So if I have an external threat, physical threat, or mental threat. So for example, oh, that person might be thinking this, and if I don't manage to do this, and then we get into a reaction of stress. And we can't get rid of it because the threat is always there. And here, which is why I ask all of you to, in order to diminish this stress, because I ask all of you to diminish your stress levels because the society at large is going in a totally wrong direction with more and more stress. For example, people in Holland, half the sicknesses are increasing at a frightful rate. In Holland, half the people have a diagnosis of cancer. In Italy, we're getting near that rate, 1 out of 3. But anyway, I can't remember exactly. But the point is, if we all have the same problems and we're making the same mistakes and acting the same way, there's something wrong. So, for example, so if we look at Holland, it's a rich country, everything well organized, etc. So why is there such a high incidence of tumors? And one of the reasons is that they found because there's a constant level of stress. Chronic stress, we have cortisol at a very high level, and then which causes inflammation, which is one of the main causes of tumors. Anyway, that's what I understood from this. Therefore, the fact of needing to be less stressed, is not an option. It's fundamental. And in order to combat this, we need to make a commitment. It's not to work less or to do many things. So our stress comes principally what we think, not what we're actually doing. So it's not a question of doing less. How many physical threats do we have in our life? When's the last time you had a physical threat? But there's a positive aspect of external threats because we react with stress, but there's a part of our mind, unwittingly, after 90 seconds, it does a research. Oh, is that stress factor still there externally, or has it gone? So when the brain's reviewed the situation, there's no longer stress, then we calm down. But, okay, when the fire is no longer there, I can calm down. But when there's a kind of ghost or an apparition or something in our mind. So those things which cause chronic stress. So problems, work are not the main causes of stress. It's something internal. All right, so I'm not saying if you take away, eliminate if, we'll resolve it completely, but it'll certainly diminish stress because certain consequences after the if are just no longer created because there's no if. Okay. So until next Sunday, we eliminate the word if. Okay, it'll come out every now and again. Okay, I'm not going to say it. You renew your commitment, and gradually we give ourselves a direction until it becomes natural not to use it. We give a direction to the mind. And another word I eliminated is you said. Because the truth is, I've got absolutely no idea what you said. What we should say is, this is what I understood. I can't. But I can't say with certainty what you said. I can only say what I actually not only think you said, but what I remember that you said, I think you said. And you don't, another thing is, you don't say this is this way, like this. You say, this is how it appears to me. Because every time we're saying this is this and this is that, we are solidifying this subjective view we have of things. Whereas if we say, it appears to me like this, we're saying in a more truthful way, more truthful in terms of reality. So another thing is in terms of neurolinguistics. We're here together. And I say to you, in 20 minutes it'll be 1 o'clock. There are two ways I can say to myself. There are only 20 minutes left, or there are still 20 minutes left to this presentation. But in terms of the clock, it's the same. If I say to you, hey, look, we've still got 20 minutes, what's the reaction emotionally? Positive. There are only 20 minutes left. It's a threat. If there are only, and if there are only 20 minutes left, I have to talk about love, compassion and the nature of reality. I could get stressed. But if I say still, it gives me more space. And it's a huge difference. And this is something that's been verified in neurolinguistics. I'm thinking of my grandfather. At a certain point, he lost his job in 1970. He escaped from, at 14 years old, he escaped from Europe to Brazil, and he did all sorts of jobs here and there, and he managed to accumulate some money. And he invested money. At a certain point, in 1972, I think, there was a crash in the stock exchange. He lost absolutely everything. He had $2,000 left in cash. But instead of saying, I've only got $2,000, he said, no, I've still got $2,000. He went to the US where his brother was. So 1,000 went to the trip. And then 1,000 was left, and he invested it in a company that made Teflon. And said, I want to I represent you in Brazil. And they said, how much have you got to invest? I've got $1,000. And they said, okay. So okay, so non-stick lining in this Teflon that they use in little sugar bags. So he bought a whole reel of this for €1,000, and he went round to various companies offering this Teflon, and then he'd go home and cut the order to size. And then gradually the orders started to increase. And he died this year, but there's still last year, but there's still people, 80 people in his company that's still working. So he was able to do this because he didn't say, oh dear, I've only got $1,000. He said, I've still got $1,000 after my trip to the US. What am I going to do? And he managed to set up this business. And our perspective changes totally. When I say I still have, there's still possibility. I look for something to do. When I say I've only got this, I get blocked.
Che cresce, diventa più anziano, ho solo pochi anni di vita, ho ancora alcuni anni di vita.
No, you might say, hey, I've only got a few years to live. No, you say, hey, I've still got this number of years to go. But if I'm here kind of blocked, I've only got this. And we get blocked if we... And something about holidays I've never understood. You go on holiday. People love holidays. Let's say you have 7 days. Fifth day of holidays. We only have 2 days left. So the fifth day is already not such a positive day because it's about to end the holiday. You start thinking of things that you wanted to do but you haven't managed to do. The 6th day, the holiday's already over. Because I'm there, but I'm still thinking about going to work, what I have to do, etc., etc. And then the 7th day when I have to come back, well, that's a huge tragedy. I've always had the attitude, when I travel alone, I always have the idea of not having to travel until the last moment. Okay, you're in a trip. So your holidays live till the very last second. Oh, I've got a day left. How wonderful. When I was a kid, I went to the extreme. So when I was a kid, during the holiday time, in order to not waste time, I went to bed with my shoes on so I wouldn't waste time that I could use to play. So I'd say, oh, I've got an hour left, I've got an hour left, I've got a day left. How wonderful. So it's incredible how a tiny detail in the way we express things makes such a big change. It changes everything. The way in which we speak changes totally the way we think and changes, as a consequence, our reality that we live. So in order to direct the mind, we need to give direction, good direction to our speech. Lama Michel Rinpoche, when something apparently bad happened, we're at lunch with lots of people. Somebody brings a big dish and slips and everything ends up on the floor. The reaction normally is tension. He'd say, wonderful, fantastic. Oh, how wonderful. Yes, interferences has been eliminated. How wonderful. Everybody laughed and the tension was eliminated. It was 7th of June, I can't remember the year. I was working until 1:18 in the morning and I receive a call. Somebody announced me, called me, said, hey, you know what? The roof of the temple has crashed down. The ceiling had totally collapsed. And it was a really very serious situation. Lama Michel comes in, he says, oh, wonderful. Oh, the interference is gone. how great that the interference has gone. Let me just open an aside. There was a woman, a lady here called Teresa Turicchia, a very particular person, very. She was kleptomaniac. She had a very. I asked for a special blessing. I asked for a special blessing for Teresa from a Lama who came. And he said, take care of her because she eliminates interferences. When she died, a very short period afterwards, the ceiling collapsed. So that might have been a strange coincidence. But Lama Ganshin's reaction was, how great. The interferences have been eliminated. What did he mean? He didn't mean that he was happy that the ceiling collapsed. But I lived that situation in a positive way. Okay, so something bad happened. But we don't go on and on about how terrible it was. The next day we were all together. It was Lama Ganshin's birthday. And we were all in the temple together to clean the gompa, the temple. And then we did it. We redid everything, and actually it's much more beautiful than before and much more secure, important to say, because the ceiling is fixed in a much more secure way. So everything is built to new standards, was improved with new standards. So just to show that the way we speak changes things. The name that we give to things changes everything. Another thing that happens, words bring with them a concept. The concept has characteristics, functions, and when we use a word, we use words. So we're using certain words gives a certain label. This is this, be it ourselves, situations, or a person, based on projection. So for the same thing, when you have a diagnosis from the doctor, when you have it, it has an enormous weight. Okay, it's good to know what you have and what treatments I should have, but often the name has too much weight. A book that talks about this, Anti-Cancer, David Schreiber, a scientist who had cancer and asked the doctor what else he could do apart from chemo. What can I do? Chemo. The doctor said, there's nothing more you can do apart from what we're doing already. And he started researching scientifically with himself and other researchers about diet and various things. And one of the things that came up, so the two books actually, Cure and Anti-Cancer. He said one of the things that happens, so once you have the label of cancer, inevitably think we're going to die. And he started looking at probability and percentages. So, because when you give a name, a label, you affect the outcome. So the concept that we have in our mind rather than the content. So the label has a bigger weight than the context. So we have the contents, not only the label. When we give a label, but apart from the label, what's inside? How do I feel? What are the chances do I have of getting better? So every time we give a name, there are a whole load of imputations, meaning, characteristics that go with it. Now that we're... So another commitment I invite you. Okay, another one apart from if is to get rid of it. It's not to judge the other on the basis of a name that we attribute to that person, but rather the characteristics that person has. Let's imagine somebody who's in our lives, and we try to talk to that person without saying this person is. Okay, look, if we're talking about Devadatta, I can't say he's a liar, is dishonest, is calm, or agitated. I can only... So I can't say he is this way, but I can say there are times in which he's not so honest. But so in the sense situations in which he had patience, not patience. So when we enter in the characteristics, and we manage to see the subtleties, when we say this person is, and then we generalize, we project on that person that characteristic, but in a very general form. So that person is this, so that this becomes the whole person. The reality is that so I'm not a sad or a happy person, I'm both. So when I ask kids, so what is a person who lies, a liar? How many times is somebody a liar? Does somebody have to lie to be a liar? If it's just one time, if lying once is enough to be called a liar, well then we're all liars. So it's the same way with being honest. If we're honest once, doesn't make us an honest person. So at times. So really, there are people who aren't liars and who aren't honest. Sometimes they're honest, sometimes they lie. We can't generalize on the basis of one attribute that came out once. When we make these changes in the way we speak, we change, we model the way we think, our perspective on life. Therefore, I ask you to reflect on this and write it down. But writing things down often helps. When we write with a pen and paper, actually when we use it's interesting, if we write by hand, concepts remain within us much more than if we were to type them out on a computer. So write it down. So list of characteristics I want to improve. So ways I speak in which are not good for me. We start one by one. So we start with if, then we say you said, and we don't define things by saying this is like this. We say this is how it appears to me, and then we don't say this person is. So we can look at somebody and say this behavior I like, this behavior I don't. But we can't generalize on the person because he did something bad once or twice. So it's important not to label people, and that totally, it changes our way of seeing things. The next step, which I can't get into now, which is important, first we need to love ourselves, take care of ourselves, develop which is good for us, and abandon that which is bad for us. And we see everything that happens to us as an instrument to work on this within ourselves. Okay. So where do we practice the spiritual path to become more stable, etc.? Every day. The next step after this is to open our heart to others. In other words, the first step, so we become a wise, selfish person. So how much is mine and I important? So if it is important, let's try and do what is good for us. So let's be selfishly wise, or wise selfishly. No. So we become egoistical, but in a very wise manner. And we open up. And that means expanding the love we have to ourselves, to others as well, without a hierarchy. And this is fundamental. It opens us to love ourselves, love others in the same way, and not see the distinction. And the next aspect, which runs in parallel, and to live life in a very consistent way. We said before, we live in a very subjective reality. We live a very subjective reality, but we view it as objective. But the reality is, when I see you, I think I see you. For example, when we asked, do you see Lama? So implicit in that is, do you see the reality? Not the way you perceive it. We need to develop this ability to live subjective reality as subjective reality. So that which is relative, we see it as relative. This is part of the development of wisdom. If somebody were to ask me, what does it mean to be Buddhist? Is to embrace the instruments that Buddha gave us to love ourselves and to love others, and to have a coherent, consistent view of reality. You can recite thousands of mantras. You can have a house full of images, but that's not necessarily the path. Buddhism is not about an external form. It's all to do about your internal behavior. The fundamentals are to love yourself, love others, and to have a coherent, consistent vision of reality. Oh, sacred art and mantras and everything, they're instruments to enable us to achieve this. So that, in essence, is the path. I wanted to conclude by asking you to make a commitment, but each one has to think for themselves. So to observe not only how I use speech with others, but more with myself. Let's say for a week, maximum 2 weeks. And then you can renew. So you can renew even a week at a week. Do I want to continue after a week? You can, yes, son. Okay, then I go on. So when it becomes stable, this commitment, you might decide to take another commitment.
Ogni tanto quando si prende un impegno del genere poi sembra che le cose succedano apposta per farci rompere l'impegno.
And it's funny, once you start making a commitment, it seems that things happen to make it more difficult for you to keep the commitment. So, as we say in Brazil, the more I pray, the more ghosts appeared, phantoms appeared. So, I might have the commitment not to get angry, and I'm really, really determined, but then everything comes to that seems to want to take me away from my commitments. So let's make our dedications. I want to make a special dedication at the end of the Guru Puja. We'll do it again to dedicate to peace, for the environment, principally that there be awareness, where there be a world where we can develop respect and love. And to be able to see that happiness is not based on what I have, but rather what I materially, but rather what there is inside. That there are people in the world that and that there be people who can get into contact with other people and transmit positive ideas. And in this regard, I'm thinking of the Pope, who has enormous power. Whether you agree with everything that's transmitted by a certain religion or not, I did meet Papa Francesca, Pope Francis once, and also other spiritual leaders. But when I met, in particular, Pope Francis, I was I felt his presence very strongly. So, beyond whether you're in agreement or not, I would like to make a dedication to the Pope now, So in Buddhist tradition, there are many traditions, and one of them is to dedicate.
Drove munsel takto ne gyur chi kewa kuntu yanda lama dang drame cheke pela long ching sada lamge yunde rabzo ne dorje change kopa nyur toba sho simche ne ba chinye pa nyur tu ne le targyur chi drove neni malu pa takto chungwa me brasho Menam tudan dembada sanga dejo drubai kandro simbola sopa ninje semdan dengyurochi chonam kuna ludan semdunga neba chinyepa teda dagi sonamgi dega gyatso to parasho Nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan delekshin ninsen takto delekpe kuncho sumki chingelo Kuncho sumki ngodrub tsol, kuncho sumki trashishu.
At dawn or dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Thank you, everybody. And this afternoon, we'll have the refuge taking ceremony. And as translator, I just want to say the 6 perfections that I didn't have time to say when Lama listed them. They are generosity, morality, patience, joyful effort, concentration, and wisdom. Thank you.